The Henderson family had owned the Riverside estate for 15 years. The pool, a custom-built saltwater masterpiece that stretched 45 feet with a gradual beach entry design, had been Marcus Henderson's most prized possession. Every dollar he'd earned during his decades in finance had eventually filtered into this sanctuary. The smart heating system, the UV filtration, the limestone decking that stayed cool even in August. Marcus was dead now, 3 years, a stroke at his desk sudden and absolute. His widow, Patricia Henderson, had kept everything exactly as it was. The towel warmer still hummed. The chlorine levels were monitored by an automated system that cost more than most people's cars. The pool house, with its full bar and entertainment system, remained immaculate, waiting for guests who never quite arrived. Patricia was 67 years old, and the pool had become a shrine to a version of her life that no longer existed. She discovered the problem on a Tuesday in early June. The Mitchells lived directly behind her property, separated by a 12-foot cedar fence that had cost Patricia $8,000 to install after a particularly bitter dispute about property lines 5 years prior. The fence was her victory in that war. On one side, serenity. On the other, chaos. The Mitchells had 3 children, ages 7, 9, and 13. Their own pool had been drained 2 years ago after the deep end's concrete developed a structural crack. Rather than repair it, Corinne Mitchell, the family matriarch, had simply let it deteriorate. Now it was a mosquito breeding ground, a graveyard of plastic toys and leaves. Patricia first noticed them when she was reviewing her pool schedule on her phone, standing on the limestone terrace with a mimosa in hand. A splash, the unmistakable sound of children's play. She looked up. A small figure was treading water near the shallow end. Then another. Then 3 more children, their heads bobbing like corks. For a full 10 seconds, Patricia didn't move. She simply stared, her brain processing what her eyes were reporting. The children hadn't come through the gate. There was no way in without her electronic key. They'd climbed the fence. The impression was fresh. Disturbed cedar, 2 boards bearing muddy handprints. Patricia set down her mimosa with deliberate precision on the glass-topped table. She walked toward the pool, her movements slow and controlled. The children hadn't seen her yet. They were absorbed in their play, one boy demonstrating a cannonball, the others squealing in delight. "Excuse me," Patricia called out, her voice carrying the particular crystalline authority of a woman accustomed to obedience. The children froze mid-splash. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she identified them. The Mitchell twins, obviously, and 2 neighborhood children she didn't recognize. Out of the pool, now. Mrs. Henderson, the older Mitchell girl, Emma, scrambled toward the edge. "We were just—" "I don't care what you were just doing. Out." The children climbed out, dripping and shivering slightly despite the 87-degree heat. They grabbed their towels they'd apparently brought with them, and stood in a small, miserable group. "This pool is private property," Patricia continued, each word deliberate. "You are trespassing. If I see any of you in this pool again, I will call the police. Do you understand me?" The children nodded mutely. "Go now." They ran. Patricia watched them scrabble back up the fence, legs and arms pumping, one boy nearly falling halfway up. They disappeared over the cedar barrier like criminals fleeing a scene. Patricia stood alone on her terrace, looking at the disturbed water, at the wet footprints on her limestone that she had specifically sealed last spring to prevent staining. Her jaw tightened. She pulled out her phone and called the cedar company to get a quote on fence reinforcement. Then she increased the height of the pool alarm sensitivity. But she knew, even as she did these things, that it wouldn't be enough. 3 days later, Corinne Mitchell appeared at Patricia's front door. Patricia had been in her study, reviewing financial documents related to Marcus's trust, a task that still induced a strange, heavy sadness 5 years after his death. The doorbell's chime was sharp and insistent. She debated ignoring it. She almost did. But something made her walk to the door and open it. Corinne Mitchell stood on the doorstep in athleisure wear, expensive but inexpertly worn, the way someone wears clothing they've bought based on Instagram rather than actual lifestyle. She had the appearance of someone in her late 40s trying very hard to look younger. Her blonde hair was blown out, her makeup aggressive. She was holding a Tupperware container. "Patricia," Corinne's smile was large and practiced. "Hi, I made brownies. I thought, well, I know the kids have been a little much lately, and I wanted to extend an olive branch." Patricia stared at her. The kids were just so hot, Karen continued, her eyes not quite meeting Patricia's. Our pool's still broken and I was going to fix it, but, well, you know how it is, contractors, money, everything's so expensive. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Anyway, I talked to the kids and they said they went into your pool without asking. I was mortified, absolutely mortified. I told them it was completely unacceptable. Then they won't be back, Patricia said. Of course not, Karen said brightly. That's why I'm here, I want to make it right, and I was thinking. She paused, as if what she was about to say was tentative, delicate. The pool is so beautiful, and our family was wondering if maybe, during the summer, once in a while, we could. I don't know, just cool off in there. We'd be super respectful. We'd bring our own towels, obviously. We'd just need to, pop over once or twice a week. Patricia felt her grip on the doorframe tighten. No, she said. Karen's smile flickered. I'm sorry. No, the answer is no. Your children are not permitted on my property. If they trespass again, I will contact the police. But Patricia... This conversation is over. Patricia began to close the door. Karen's hand shot out, stopping it. Wait, can I ask why? Is it because you're still angry about the fence situation? Because that was years ago. We were all just being territorial. I thought we could move past that. Patricia looked at Karen's hand on her door, then at Karen's face. What she saw there was not genuine contrition. What she saw was a woman calculating angles, running social calculus, wondering which pressure point might work. Your children are not invited on my property, Patricia said coldly. That's the reason. It doesn't need to be more complex than that. That's insane, Karen said, and something harder entered her voice. It's just a pool. You're not even using it most of the time. You're here alone, and we're family. We live right next to you. You live next to me. We are not family. God, you're a cold bitch, Karen said, almost conversationally. She stepped back, letting go of the door. You know what? That's fine. Keep your pool, hoard it. I hope it brings you as much happiness as... She looked around at Patricia's elegant foyer, at the abstract art on the walls, at the fresh flowers on the console table. Actually, I don't think it does. I think you're just lonely and mean, and you use money to keep people away. Patricia said nothing. My kids wanted to have fun, Karen continued, her voice rising. They wanted to cool off on a hot day, and you made them feel like criminals. I'm going to remember that. She turned and walked away, her designer sneakers crisp on the marble driveway. Patricia closed the door quietly. She stood in the foyer for a long moment, not moving. Then she walked to the mirror beside the door and looked at her reflection, 67 years old, impeccably dressed, every hair in place. Cold. Yes, that's what Karen had called her. She supposed it was true. She set Karen's Tupperware of brownies on the console table and didn't touch them. 3 days later, she threw them away, uneaten. The second incursion came exactly 1 week after Karen's visit. Patricia was in her bedroom, reading a novel she'd abandoned and returned to 3 times over the past year, when she heard it. The alarm she'd installed years ago, the motion sensor connected to her pool system. It was set to trigger whenever anything larger than a raccoon approached the water. She'd installed it after a morning when she'd found a family of bats had taken refuge at the deep end. Even now, the thought of diving in to find those creatures. She set down her book and went to the window. This time there were 5 of them, the Mitchell kids plus 3 others. They'd clearly learned from the previous attempt. They weren't climbing the fence at the same spot. They'd dismantled a section of it entirely, carefully moving the panels aside. Professional work. Someone had shown them how to do it. They were, Patricia realized with a shock of cold fury, deliberately leaving it open. An invitation to others. The pool was becoming a community resource. She watched them enter the water. Not hesitantly this time, but confidently, the older kids doing cannonballs, the younger ones splashing. She watched one of them retrieve a beach ball from nowhere and begin a game of water volleyball. Patricia picked up her phone and called the local police non-emergency line. I'd like to report trespassing, she told the dispatcher. Multiple juveniles have entered my pool without permission. They've also damaged my fence. The address is... The response was discouraging. The dispatcher explained with barely concealed boredom that this was a civil matter, not a police matter. Trespassing on residential property where minors were involved was typically a matter for the family to handle. They could file a report, certainly, but it would likely just be documented. If the trespassing continued and there were genuine safety concerns, then yes, police could be called and the matter escalated. Patricia hung up. She walked downstairs, opened the glass sliding doors to the terrace, and stood at the edge of her pool, watching the children play. The boy doing the cannonball was maybe 14. Emma Mitchell was showing one of the younger children how to float on her back. There was genuine joy on these faces, the unself-conscious delight of childhood in summer. For a moment, just a moment, Patricia felt something crack inside her chest. A memory, Marcus, 20 years younger, teaching their daughter Rachel how to dive. Rachel squealing, "Again, Daddy, again." The sound of that happiness, so pure and uncomplicated. Rachel lived in California now. She hadn't visited in 2 years. Patricia turned away from the pool. She called a locksmith. By the next morning, the cedar fence had been replaced with a solid concrete wall, 8 feet tall, topped with an electric deterrent system that would trigger a harmless but intimidating shock if anything tried to climb it. The gate had been upgraded with a keypad lock that only Patricia and her house manager, Delia, knew the code to. The cost had been $14,000. She'd paid for it on her credit card that night, still awake at 2 a.m., her hands shaking slightly as she authorized the charge. The next day, Corinne Mitchell appeared at her door again. This time, she didn't hold brownies. "You installed an electric fence?" Corinne's voice was incredulous. "On a barrier between residential properties." "Not a barrier," Patricia corrected. "A boundary." "It's insane. What if a child got hurt? What if someone was injured?" "It's a harmless deterrent." "It's disproportionate," Corinne said, and now her voice had taken on a different quality, the self-righteous tone of someone who'd made a decision about who was wrong and who was right. "You're being a bad neighbor. Worse than a bad neighbor. You're being cruel." Patricia began to close the door again. "I'm going to talk to the HOA," Corinne called through the narrowing gap. "I'm going to file a formal complaint. That fence is a violation. You'll have to take it down." Patricia closed the door and locked it. She spent the next hour researching HOA code. Then she called her lawyer. The HOA hearing took place 3 weeks later, in an institutional conference room in a nondescript office building 2 miles away. Patricia wore a dark blue suit. Corinne wore the same athleisure wear, but this time her hair was messy and her makeup was smudged slightly, giving her a martyred appearance. The HOA president, a man named Richard Chen, sat at the head of the table with 2 other board members. A woman Patricia didn't recognize, and a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Ms. Patricia, Corinne has raised concerns about the electrical deterrent system on your new fence," Richard said carefully. "Can you explain the rationale?" Patricia presented her evidence methodically. Photos of the fence being dismantled, timestamps from the first 2 incidents, the security footage she'd had installed the day after Corinne's first visit. She presented the police report she'd filed. She presented her lawyer's statement that the deterrent system was within code. It was below the threshold required to cause injury, and it was a legally defensible deterrent. Then Corinne spoke. "She's trying to keep our children out," Corinne said, her voice trembling slightly, a performance Patricia recognized, a very good performance. "She's doing it to be hurtful. She could have invited them to use the pool. Most neighbors would. It's the kind thing to do. It's what community is about." "The pool is private property," Patricia's lawyer interjected. "I know it is," Corinne said, looking at Richard directly. "But there's a difference between maintaining boundaries and being cruel. And what Patricia did, the electric fence, the surveillance cameras, the concrete wall, that's not about safety. That's about punishment." The HOA board exchanged glances. Richard cleared his throat. "Patricia, do you want to respond?" Patricia considered her words very carefully. "My pool is private property. I am permitted to secure it as I see fit. The children who trespassed were told explicitly not to return. They returned anyway and vandalized my fence. I took reasonable precautions to prevent further vandalism and trespassing. That's not cruelty. It's the right to protect what's mine." "But the electric fence," the female board member said hesitantly. "It does seem like maybe there could have been other options." "Such as?" Patricia asked. "I don't know, maybe just talking to Corinne, maybe some kind of compromise." Patricia felt something harden in her. "I should not have to compromise on security of my own property due to my neighbor's refusal to supervise her own children." Corinne made a small sound, a gasp designed to communicate hurt. The board voted unanimously to require Patricia to remove the electrical deterrent system. and reduce the wall height to 6 feet, which was the HOA maximum for residential properties. Patricia lost. She had the deterrent system removed, but she kept the wall at 6 feet. She filed an appeal. While the appeal was being processed, nothing changed. The wall was still there. The gate was still locked. The pool remained closed to the neighborhood. But something had shifted. Patricia began to notice things. Flyers appeared in her mailbox, apparently generic neighborhood circulars but clearly targeted. Messages appeared on the neighborhood Facebook group. Reminder to all residents, community is about sharing and kindness, posted by an account under Corinne's name. The tone was pointed. Patricia recognized it immediately as a subtle campaign. Parents in the neighborhood began to treat Patricia differently. Where before they'd exchanged pleasantries at the mailbox or grocery store, now conversations were cordial but minimal. Someone, Patricia suspected Corinne, had clearly created a narrative. The rich widow, the grieving woman who turned bitter, who hoarded her resources and punished children for seeking innocent, cooling relief. Patricia felt the isolation like a physical thing, a weight settling on her shoulders each time she left the house. By the end of June, she'd stopped going to the neighborhood book club. By July, she'd declined the invitation to the community 4th of July gathering. The pool remained unused and untouched, the water crystal clear but empty of life. Patricia sat in her study one evening, staring at an investment portfolio that no longer interested her, and wondered when she'd become the villain in her own neighborhood story. She was 67 years old. Marcus had been gone 3 years. Rachel still hadn't visited. The pool, that monument to their shared happiness, had become the symbol of her isolation. She thought about Corinne's words. I think you're just lonely and mean, and you use money to keep people away. What if Corinne was right? What if the wall wasn't really about boundaries at all? August arrived like an unwelcome guest, bringing heat that seemed personal in its intensity. Patricia woke each morning to temperatures in the low 90s, stepped outside to 95-degree humidity, and retreated into her climate-controlled home, defeated. The pool remained perfect and unused. She'd begun scrolling through neighborhood social media more than she'd like to admit. Not obsessively. She told herself this wasn't obsession, merely curiosity, but regularly enough that she'd noticed patterns. Corinne had become something of an unofficial neighborhood coordinator, organizing impromptu gatherings at the park, setting up water balloon competitions at nearby fields, creating a community Slack channel for mothers and caregivers. In the Slack channel, there were frequent references to the pool that wouldn't share and jokes about water restrictions and gated communities. It was all delivered with the light touch of humor, but Patricia understood what it was: a coordinated campaign of social exclusion disguised as good-natured ribbing. She'd been outmaneuvered by a woman in expensive athletic wear who'd been fighting for her children's access to free cooling. And the neighborhood had taken Corinne's side because the narrative was compelling. Corinne was fighting for her family's well-being. Patricia was simply being selfish. The complexity, the fact that Patricia's property was genuinely hers, that she had the absolute legal right to exclude whoever she wanted, that boundaries were necessary and healthy, didn't matter. The neighborhood wasn't interested in nuance. They were interested in a story, and Corinne had told it better. Patricia sat in her study on a Tuesday in early August, when the heat index had reached 109 degrees, and made a decision that she wasn't entirely aware she was making until she'd already picked up the phone. She called Delia, her house manager. Delia had worked for Patricia for 8 years. She was a woman in her 60s, originally from Guatemala, now a proud American citizen with 3 grown children and 5 grandchildren. She had a warm laugh and an unflinching ability to manage the complicated logistics of maintaining a large home. Patricia trusted her more than she trusted most family. Delia, I need a favor, Patricia said. Of course, Mrs. Henderson, what do you need? I'm going to leave for a week. I'm going to visit Rachel in California. While I'm gone, I need you to leave the pool gate unlocked during the day, just during daytime hours, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. There was a pause. Mrs. Henderson, are you sure? The trespassing. I'm sure, just the daytime hours. Leave it locked at night. Can you do that? Yes, of course, but why? Patricia didn't have a good answer to that question. Why? Because she was lonely. Because she wanted to be liked. because the thought of children playing in her pool, the sound of their joy echoing across her terrace, suddenly seemed less threatening than the isolation she'd constructed. "Just do it, please," Patricia said quietly. She booked a flight for Thursday morning, leaving 2 days for word to spread. 2 days for someone to notice the gate would be open. 2 days for the pool to become what Karen had wanted it to be all along, a public resource, shared and joyful and free. She told no one, not Karen, not her lawyer, not even Delia, beyond the simple instruction. Patricia left for the airport at 7 a.m. on Thursday, her car loaded with luggage. She knew that by noon the gate would be open. She knew that by 1 p.m. the first children would have discovered it. She knew that by nightfall her pool would be full of people who weren't her, doing things she'd spent years preventing. She should have felt something about that, violation perhaps, or loss. Instead, she felt something closer to relief. Rachel's house in San Diego was a 4-bedroom craftsman with a small pool of its own and a view of the canyon. Patricia had been here exactly 3 times in the past 5 years, each visit less than 48 hours long, each visit somehow both warm and strained. Rachel was a therapist, ironically. She worked with families in crisis, helping them navigate the specific pain of disconnection. She'd spent years in graduate school studying exactly the thing she seemed unable to heal in her own family. Rachel was 52 years old now, younger than Patricia had been when Rachel was born. She looked like Marcus, had his sharp cheekbones, his direct gaze, and sometimes Patricia found it difficult to look at her for that reason. "Mom," Rachel said at the airport, and they hugged in that careful way that suggested both genuine feeling and genuine distance. "It's so good to see you." "You too, sweetheart," Patricia said and meant it. They drove to Rachel's house, making conversation about flights and weather and nothing of substance. Rachel had ordered takeout, Thai food, Patricia's favorite, and they sat at Rachel's kitchen table as evening fell, chopsticks clicking against ceramic. "So what's the occasion?" Rachel asked. "You never take vacations. Is everything okay?" Patricia had prepared for this question. She had a narrative ready. She was feeling restless. She wanted a change of scenery. She thought it might be good to spend time with Rachel before the holidays. None of it was untrue, and all of it avoided the real answer, which was, "I left my pool unlocked and I'm terrified of what that means." "I just thought we could use some time together," Patricia said. Rachel studied her for a moment with the particular intensity of someone trained to read between lines. "The neighborhood thing is bothering you." It wasn't a question. Patricia set down her chopsticks. "How did you know about that?" "Karen Mitchell posted about it on the neighborhood Facebook group that's connected to the city directory. I saw it because I still get city updates. And then I Googled Henderson Pool HOA and found several threads." Rachel smiled sadly. "Small internet. You should know someone's always watching." Patricia felt her face warm. It was a boundary issue. The children were trespassing. "I know, I read the whole thing." Rachel took a sip of wine. "Mom, I'm not here to judge you. You were right. The pool is your property. The children were trespassing. Everything you did was legal and defensible." "But," Patricia heard the unspoken word, "but you were also lonely, and you weaponized a boundary into a wall. And I recognize that because I've spent years watching people do exactly that, create distance under the guise of protection, because distance feels safer than vulnerability." Patricia looked away. "I do it too," Rachel continued quietly. "I haven't been home to visit you in 2 years. I tell myself it's because of work or the time zone difference or that I'll do it next month. But really, it's because being around you reminds me that I lost Dad, and I was too busy with my career to be there enough at the end. And I don't know how to forgive myself for that, so I pretend the distance is about logistics." Patricia felt something shift in her chest, a loosening, a crack in the wall she'd been building around her own grief. "I miss you," Patricia said, and she was surprised to discover she was crying. Rachel reached across the table and took her mother's hand. "I miss you too." They sat like that for several minutes, hands connected across Thai food and the accumulated pain of loss and distance. Outside, the canyon darkened into night. Tricia stayed in California for 10 days instead of 7. She and Rachel didn't solve anything. The problems between them were too deep, the griefs too old. But they talked more than they'd talked in years. Rachel told Patricia about her practice, about the families she worked with who were fractured by old hurts and rigid boundaries. Patricia told Rachel about Marcus, about how she'd kept the pool exactly as it was because touching anything about it felt like admitting he was really gone. On the second to last day, they went to Rachel's pool and swam together. It was a small pool, nothing like Patricia's monument to excess. Just a modest lap pool where Rachel did her morning swim routine. They swam side by side, not talking, just moving through the water. When they climbed out, Rachel took a photo of them standing together, both of them dripping wet and slightly sunburned, both of them smiling. Rachel sent the photo to Patricia's phone. "For when you get home," Rachel said, "reminder that we're still connected." On her flight back to the East Coast, Patricia found herself thinking about what awaited her. Her pristine, perfect, empty pool. The neighborhood that had turned against her. Corinne Mitchell, who had wanted nothing more than cooling water for her children on hot days. Tricia realized, somewhere above the clouds, that she'd made a terrible mistake. Not in defending her property, that had been correct, but in not finding a way to do it that didn't require maximum hostility. There had been middle paths, designated hours, supervised days, liability waivers. She'd chosen the scorched earth approach because she'd been afraid of loss of control, afraid of change, afraid that allowing one thing to shift would mean everything shifted. She landed at Newark at 6 p.m. on a Thursday. She drove home, her hands tight on the steering wheel. The house was dark when she pulled into the driveway. Delia had left it that way, per Patricia's instructions. She was supposed to close everything up when Patricia left. Patricia parked and walked around to the pool area. In the gathering dusk, she could see it immediately. Her pool was covered in something. Her heart rate spiked. She quickened her pace, moving onto the terrace. The pool was covered in a disgusting, murky green film. There was something floating in it, trash, plastic, what looked like possibly organic matter. The water, which she'd left crystalline and perfect, was now foul. Patricia felt her knees weaken. She picked up her phone with shaking hands and called Delia. "Delia, what happened to my pool?" "Oh, Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I came by this morning to check on things, and it was already like that. I think children have been using it, and nobody has been maintaining it properly. The chemicals, the—" "How could you let this happen?" Patricia heard her own voice, sharp and cold. "Mrs. Henderson, you left the gate unlocked. I followed your instructions. I didn't know." Patricia hung up. She stood at the edge of her pool, staring into the corrupted water, and felt the full weight of her decision crash over her like a wave. She'd wanted them to use it. She'd wanted it to be shared. She'd wanted to prove to herself and to the neighborhood that she wasn't selfish, that she could be generous. But she hadn't wanted it like this. She hadn't wanted negligence. She hadn't wanted her carefully maintained sanctuary to become a dumping ground. Or maybe a small voice in her head suggested, you wanted to sabotage it. You wanted proof that opening up always leads to destruction. Patricia went inside and poured herself a glass of wine. Then another. Then she sat in her study in the dark and let the house close around her like a tomb. By morning, she'd decided. She wasn't going to allow any of it anymore. Not the negligence, not the carelessness, not the pretense of generosity that had clearly been a poor decision. She called a pool service and scheduled a complete drain and cleaning. She updated the gate locks, new codes that only she and Delia would have. She called her lawyer and asked about a permanent injunction against trespassing. The lawyer was sympathetic but doubtful. Without active harassment or threats, an injunction is going to be difficult, and technically, you invited them by leaving the gate unlocked. Any defense attorney is going to say you assumed the risk. Patricia hung up furious. She spent the day sitting in her study, not answering calls. Delia left 3 messages. A number she didn't recognize called twice. By evening, Delia had sent a text. "Mrs. Henderson, Corinne Mitchell is here. She wants to talk to you about the pool. I told her you weren't home, but she seems upset." Patricia didn't respond, but she did walk to her front window and watch Corinne Mitchell standing on her driveway, gesticulating at Delia with increasing agitation. Patricia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Whatever was about to happen, she sensed, would be the culmination of months of accumulated resentment. She watched Corinne turn away from Delia, look directly at Patricia's window. Did Corinne somehow know Patricia was watching, and then storm back toward her own property? Patricia waited for the consequences to arrive. The email arrived on Patricia's personal account on Saturday morning. It was from Corinne Mitchell. and it was addressed to the Riverside Community Homeowners Association Board. Patricia had been CC'd, along with what appeared to be the entire neighborhood, or at least everyone with an email on file. Subject line: Request for emergency HOA meeting, hazardous pool conditions. Patricia felt her vision blur slightly as she read. I am writing to formally request an emergency meeting of the HOA board to discuss serious safety and health concerns related to the Henderson pool. As you know, Ms. Henderson recently left the pool gate unlocked, ostensibly as an act of goodwill toward neighborhood children seeking relief from the extreme heat. However, in Ms. Henderson's absence, the pool was not properly maintained, and it has now become a biohazard. Stagnant, contaminated water that poses a genuine threat to neighborhood children who may access it without proper supervision or warnings. Furthermore, I have concerns about Ms. Henderson's judgment and fitness as a property owner. Her decision to secure the pool with an electric fence, followed by a concrete wall, followed by suddenly opening it to unsupervised access. This pattern suggests instability. I am requesting that the HOA investigate whether this property is in violation of community standards and whether the owner is in compliance with basic maintenance requirements. Most importantly, I am requesting that the HOA mandate immediate remediation of this hazardous condition and require Ms. Henderson to install proper warning signage. Children could become seriously ill or injured if exposed to this water. I look forward to the board's response and to our emergency meeting. Karen Mitchell. Patricia read it 3 times. The email was brilliant. Karen had transformed the story completely. Patricia had gone from a boundary-setting homeowner to an unstable woman creating hazardous conditions. The electric fence, justified, necessary, had been reframed as evidence of mental instability. The sudden opening of the pool had become either a psychotic break or a deliberate abandonment of safety. And Karen wasn't asking for access anymore. Karen was asking for accountability. The response came within hours. Richard Chen, the HOA president, sent his own email. Emergency meeting scheduled for Tuesday, 7 p.m. at the community center. All parties involved are encouraged to attend. By Monday, there were 17 responses to Karen's original email, some supportive of Karen, some more neutral, but all of them indicating that everyone in the neighborhood was now aware that Patricia's pool was a biohazard. Patricia called her lawyer. This is a problem, her lawyer, a man named David Sinclair, said after Patricia read him the email. She's raised legitimate safety concerns. The pool is technically your responsibility, and if children were to become ill. No one has become ill, Patricia said. Yet, but if someone does, and it's traced to contaminated water on your property that you knew was contaminated and failed to properly warn about, you could face significant liability. And worse, criminal charges if a child is seriously harmed. Patricia felt the bottom drop out of her stomach. What do I do? You drain and clean the pool immediately, and you install warning signage, professional signage, the kind that makes it crystal clear the pool is not in use and not accessible. I'd recommend the biohazard signs. She'll make a bigger story of that, Patricia said. Probably, David agreed. But at least you're being responsible. Right now, you're the person with the hazardous condition on her property. The best thing you can do is remove the hazard. Patricia hired a pool service to drain everything. The biohazard they found in the water was actually less dramatic than Karen had implied. Mostly algae, some debris, some general water degradation from 5 days of unsupervised use and summer heat. Nothing catastrophic. Nothing that couldn't be fixed with proper chemicals and filtration. But the narrative didn't care about actual danger levels. The narrative cared about perception. By Tuesday afternoon, when the pool was being drained, the neighborhood knew about it. Someone had probably taken photos and texted Karen. The emergency HOA meeting took place in a conference room at the community center. This time, there was an actual audience. 30 or 40 neighborhood residents had shown up, apparently sensing drama. Richard Chen called the meeting to order. Karen presented her concerns about the biohazard conditions. She'd brought printed evidence, photos of the contaminated water, which looked worse than it actually was because of the algae. She'd also printed multiple screenshots from the neighborhood social media in which children had posted about swimming in Patricia's pool, with captions like, "Finally," and "Thanks for letting us cool off." The problem, Karen said, looking directly at Patricia, isn't that Ms. Henderson is a bad person. I don't think she is. I think she struggled with this situation and her judgment has been compromised. But as a neighborhood community, we have a responsibility to protect children's safety. And that means we need assurances that this hazardous situation won't happen again. Patricia's lawyer, who was sitting beside her, squeezed her arm. I'd like to propose, Karen continued, that the HOA require Ms. Henderson to install proper warning signage immediately, which I see she's already done. Karen gestured to Patricia. But I'd also like to propose that we require some kind of annual inspection of the pool facility to ensure ongoing compliance with safety standards. It was, Patricia had to admit, brilliant. Karen was being reasonable. Karen was asking for something that sounded protective rather than punitive, and it would give Karen and potentially other neighborhood members ongoing access to Patricia's property. I also have a question, Karen said, looking at Patricia with an expression of genuine concern. Ms. Henderson, do you have family support? Are you okay? Because the pattern of your decision-making over the past 6 weeks has been concerning, and I just want to make sure you have the resources you need. It was a kill shot, delivered with a smile. Patricia felt everyone in the room look at her with a sudden sympathy that was worse than hostility. She was now the neighbor everyone had to worry about. She was the eccentric old widow making poor decisions. She was the unstable one. Patricia's lawyer stood up. My client has taken appropriate remediation steps. The pool is being properly maintained and will be posted with clear warning signage. There is no basis in the HOA code for requiring annual inspections of private pools on private property, and Ms. Henderson's personal well-being is not a matter for this board to adjudicate. Of course not, Richard Chen said hurriedly. We're just concerned about community safety. Community safety has been addressed, David said coldly. But the damage was done. The HOA sent Patricia a formal notice that she was required to install professional hazard signage on the pool gate and to maintain the pool to safety standards as defined by local health regulations. They also recommended, not required, but recommended, which was worse because it meant the board was hedging their bets, that Patricia consider hiring a professional maintenance company to oversee the pool. Patricia did both. She hired the most expensive pool maintenance company in the area. She had professional industrial-grade signage installed. Pool closed, biohazard, no entry without authorization. And then she changed the gate code again. By the end of August, the heat wave broke. September arrived cooler and drier. The neighborhood's attention moved on to back-to-school shopping and new school year logistics. But something had shifted in how the neighborhood treated Patricia. She noticed it at the mailbox, where conversations with neighbors grew briefer and warmer in a way that meant false. She noticed it in the community Slack, where people no longer tagged her in neighborhood updates. She noticed it in the way Karen smiled at her during one encounter at the mailbox, a smile that contained no warmth, only triumph. Patricia was effectively shunned. She had won every legal battle, she had secured her property, she had protected her boundary. And in winning, she had lost something she hadn't realized she wanted back. The simple ability to be part of something. In mid-September, on a morning when the temperature had finally dropped to something bearable, Patricia stood on her terrace and looked at her pool. Crystal clear, properly maintained, completely empty of life. The biohazard signs hung on the gate, visible from the street, a permanent announcement of danger. She thought about Marcus, about Rachel, about Karen's children on hot days. She thought about the choice she'd made to leave the gate unlocked, which had been an attempt at redemption, and then the choice to drain and replace everything, which had been an attempt at control, and then the installation of the biohazard signs, which was an attempt at truth that had been weaponized into an attempt at cruelty. Every choice had led to exactly where she'd started, alone, protected, and utterly isolated. The real estate agent, a woman named Sylvia Chen, Richard's sister, coincidentally, arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September. She walked through the house with the particular predatory kindness of someone who'd spent years calculating the monetary worth of other people's lives. Beautiful property, Sylvia said, making notes on her iPad. Original hardwood floors, custom kitchen, pool is immaculate. She said this last part while standing at the edge of the terrace, looking at the crystal-clear water with the biohazard signs prominently displayed on the gate. The pool might be a slight complication, Sylvia continued carefully. The biohazard signage will need to remove that once you decide to sell. Otherwise, potential buyers will assume something serious happened. Something serious did happen, Patricia said, and then it was resolved. Of course, Sylvia said in the tone of someone who'd learned never to argue with sellers. But aesthetically, we might want to reset the narrative, new signage, something welcoming, private pool rather than biohazard. Patricia almost laughed. Reset the narrative, as if it were that easy to make people forget what they'd been told about you. I want to sell it furnished, Patricia said. As is, and I'm putting it on the market quickly. I want to accept an offer within 30 days if possible. Sylvia made a note. That's an aggressive timeline, but doable. What's driving the timeline? Health issues. I'm moving in with my daughter, Patricia said, and realized as she said it that she hadn't talked to Rachel about this yet. California. Ah, that's wonderful, Sylvia said, and meant it in the specific way that real estate agents mean things, as in, wonderful for the purposes of getting this house sold. Okay, let's get some photos. I'll have listings up by Thursday. Patricia called Rachel that evening. I'm selling the house, Patricia said without preamble. There was a long silence on the other end. Mom, is this sudden? Yes and no, I've been thinking about it for weeks, and I'd like to come to California, not permanently necessarily, but for a while. I could rent an apartment, I could be closer to you. Rachel's voice when she spoke again was carefully controlled, the professional therapist voice, which meant she was processing emotions while trying not to feel them. That's huge. What brought this on? Patricia sat in her study, looking at her walls of expensive art, her carefully curated life. I've been isolated for too long. I've been protecting things that don't need protecting, and I miss you. I want to know my daughter before I die. Rachel made a sound, somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Okay, we can figure this out. You should know. I've been thinking about moving back to the East Coast. My practice has an opportunity to expand, and I've realized I'm running away from you the same way you're running away from life. So maybe instead of you moving here, we meet somewhere in the middle. Where? Patricia asked. I don't know. Let's figure it out together. But first, let's make sure you're okay, because this feels like a big decision made quickly. It is, Patricia agreed, but it's the right one. After they hung up, Patricia sat in the dark and felt, for the first time in months, something like peace. Sylvia's listing went up on Thursday. By Friday afternoon, there were 7 inquiries. The house sold to the third inquirer, a couple in their early 30s, both tech entrepreneurs looking for a suburban base for weekend retreats. The wife had actually cried when she saw the pool. It's perfect, she'd said. We'll have so many people over. We'll finally have a place for people to gather. The final asking price was $2.2 million. Patricia had paid $1.8 million 15 years ago. The market had been good to her. The closing was scheduled for November 15th. But something unexpected happened in early October. A person Patricia didn't recognize showed up at her door. She was a woman in her late 30s, wearing business casual attire and carrying a thick folder. Ms. Henderson, my name is Sarah Malik. I'm an attorney representing a group of neighborhood residents. Sarah held out a business card. I'm here regarding the biohazard signage on your pool gate. We believe it constitutes a violation of community aesthetic standards and property values. Patricia stared at her. Additionally, Sarah continued, my clients believe the signage was deliberately installed to harm neighborhood property values and mental well-being. They're exploring whether this constitutes a form of harassment under local ordinances. I installed the signage because the HOA required it, Patricia said coldly. Yes, and the HOA is now questioning whether that requirement was appropriate. Richard Chen has contacted me. He's concerned that the signage has created a negative impression of the entire neighborhood. There's been a 40% decrease in neighborhood inquiries about open houses since the biohazard signage became visible from the street. Patricia understood immediately. The neighborhood had realized that the biohazard signs were bad for everyone, and they wanted them gone. They wanted Patricia to remove them, which would be an admission that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding, which would be an admission that Karen's narrative had been correct. I'll have them removed when I sell, Patricia said, which will be by mid-November. Sarah's expression shifted. You're selling. Yes. Ah, Sarah glanced down at her folder, then back at Patricia. That complicates things. The concern is that if you sell, whoever buys will inherit this property with the biohazard signage, which could. Not my problem, Patricia said and closed the door. She called Sylvia the next day. The new owners, they should be aware that the biohazard signage is on the property, Patricia said. Of course they're aware, Sylvia said. They saw it when they toured. They said it didn't bother them. In fact, the husband said it was kind of funny, very protective of the pool. Patricia smiled slightly. The new owners were tech entrepreneurs, young, probably hadn't been invested in the neighborhood drama. They probably saw the signs as endearing, as evidence of a homeowner who cared about safety. They probably had no idea what the signs actually represented. Good, Patricia said. Leave the signage in place. On November 12th, exactly one day before the closing, Patricia received a visitor. Corinne Mitchell appeared at her door at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, visibly agitated. The signage, Corinne said without preamble. It's going to stay even though you're selling. Yes, Patricia said. That's not fair, Corinne said, and she sounded genuinely upset. You're leaving that for the new owners. You're leaving it for us. That signage affects everyone on this street. It's vindictive. Patricia looked at Corinne, this woman who'd spent months orchestrating Patricia's social exile, who'd weaponized concern into control, who'd made Patricia question her own judgment and sanity, and felt something clear and clean settle in her chest. Yes, Patricia agreed. It is vindictive. You won. You did exactly what you set out to do. You convinced the neighborhood I was wrong. You got me socially isolated. You made me doubt myself, but I'm leaving now, and the signage stays. It's a monument to how we treated each other. That's insane, Corinne said. Probably, Patricia agreed, but it's done. Corinne stood in Patricia's foyer, her mouth opening and closing. She looked smaller suddenly, diminished by the realization that she'd been playing a game with someone who'd just decided to quit playing entirely. My children are innocent, Corinne said finally. They just wanted to cool off. I know, Patricia said, and she meant it. That's what made it all so tragic. The children had been innocent. Corinne had weaponized that innocence into a tool of control, and Patricia had responded to that control with cruelty, and everyone had lost. I'm sorry, Patricia said, and she meant that too. I should have handled this differently. I should have found a way to say no that didn't feel like rejection. I was wrong. Corinne's face softened slightly. Really? Really, and you were also wrong. My property was mine to control. My boundary was legitimate, but I built it out of fear, not out of genuine need. And you responded by trying to make everyone see me as the villain, which, Patricia paused, which worked, so we're both complicit. Corinne's eyes were wet. I just wanted my kids to be cool, that's all I wanted. I know. And you couldn't just let them, you had to make it this huge thing. Yes, Patricia said, because I'm afraid of change and I'm afraid of people, and I'm afraid that if I let anything shift, everything will fall apart. And I handled that badly. Corinne nodded slowly. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but she didn't. She just turned around and left. Patricia watched her walk down the driveway toward her car. The new owners, Jennifer and Michael Patel, took possession of the house on November 15th, a gray and cold Thursday morning that felt appropriately final. Patricia had movers take everything. She was leaving the furniture as promised, but personal items, photographs, Marcus's watch, Rachel's baby footprint cast, all of it was packed into boxes and shipped to a storage facility in California pending her move. She stood in the empty house on the morning of the closing, looking at the spaces where her life had been, and felt the particular emptiness of transition. Sylvia walked through with the final paperwork. They stood in the kitchen, the beautiful custom kitchen that had cost $180,000 to design, and Patricia signed over everything to Jennifer and Michael Patel. They seem nice, Sylvia offered. Jennifer said something about wanting to host parties by the pool. She said the biohazard signage was kind of iconic. Patricia smiled despite herself. In a way, it was iconic. It was the physical representation of a neighborhood's collective failure to find compassion for each other. Where are you moving to? Sylvia asked. California initially, then probably somewhere in the middle. My daughter and I are going to figure out how to be close to each other. That's nice, Sylvia said, and meant it in the genuine way, not the real estate agent way. Losing a house is hard. I hope you find something better." "I don't think I'm looking for better," Patricia said. "I'm looking for different, and I think I need that." Patricia spent one night in a hotel near the airport, then flew to California to stay with Rachel for a few weeks while she decided what was next. Rachel had cleared out her guest room. There were fresh flowers on the bedside table. She'd stocked the refrigerator with Patricia's favorite foods. It was the kind of small, careful kindness that said, "I want you here, but I'm still afraid to hope too much." They fell into a rhythm. Coffee together in the morning, Rachel's work, Patricia volunteering at a local library, doing something with her hands and her time that mattered, dinners together, conversations that were sometimes deep and sometimes about nothing at all, and both were valuable. 2 weeks into her stay, Patricia received a call from Delia. "Mrs. Henderson, I don't know if you'll want to hear this, but I thought you should know." "What is it?" Patricia asked. "The new owners, they removed the biohazard signs last week. But then they had the pool tested, and apparently the signage was accurate. There was still some contamination in the water from when the pool sat unmaintained. The pool company told them it needed significant remediation." Patricia felt her stomach drop. "Are the new owners upset?" "I don't think so. They found it funny, actually. They said you were trying to warn them, but Mrs. Henderson—" The sign said biohazard. Someone reported it to the neighborhood association. The health department got involved. There's an actual investigation now about the pool and about when you owned it and what happened." Patricia closed her eyes. "Apparently Corinne Mitchell, the neighbor, she's saying the pool was hazardous when she had the HOA meeting and nothing was done about it. She's filing a complaint with the county health department and possibly considering suing the HOA for negligence in not taking her concerns seriously." Patricia sat down on Rachel's couch, the phone still pressed to her ear. "There's more," Delia said quietly. "Corinne's saying she's going to investigate whether you deliberately left the pool contaminated when you sold it, whether you poisoned your own property to harm the new owners." "That's ridiculous," Patricia whispered. "I know, but she's saying you did it out of spite, that you left it contaminated and sold it to people who weren't part of the neighborhood drama, and she's now questioning whether it was intentional negligence or some kind of revenge scheme." Patricia felt the walls closing in again, felt the narrative shifting, felt the ground giving way beneath her feet one more time. "Mrs. Henderson, are you still there?" "Yes," Patricia said, "I'm here." "I'm sorry, I just thought you should know." After Patricia hung up, she sat in Rachel's guest room and tried to understand what was happening. She had bought biohazard signs to be safe. Corinne had claimed the pool was dangerous, so Patricia had provided evidence that it was. Then she had left the signs up as a kind of final statement about their mutual destruction. And now Corinne was using those same signs as evidence that Patricia had been negligent or worse. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of irony. Patricia told Rachel what was happening. Rachel listened, her therapist face on, her expression neutral. When Patricia finished, Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "You're going to have to face this," Rachel said finally. "How? I've already moved. I've already sold. But people are going to want to talk to you. Lawyers, probably, the health department. You need to be honest about what happened and why." "I am being honest," Patricia said. "Not entirely," Rachel said gently. "You're leaving out the part where you deliberately left the gate unlocked knowing what would happen. You're leaving out the part where you installed biohazard signs that were technically true but also deliberately punitive. You're leaving out all the choices you made that led to this situation." Patricia felt something rise in her chest, defensiveness, anger. "I was protecting my property." "You were protecting your pride," Rachel said. "And I understand. I do the same thing. But now people are questioning whether you were negligent in selling a contaminated pool, and instead of facing that head-on, you're going to hide in California and pretend it's not happening." "What do you want me to do?" Patricia asked. "I want you to go back. I want you to talk to the new owners. I want you to tell them the truth about what happened. I want you to help them fix it. And I want you to stop running away from every hard situation." Patricia looked at her daughter and saw Marcus in her face. That particular combination of stubbornness and righteousness that had always made Patricia feel smaller and more wrong. "Okay," Patricia said, "I'll go back." Patricia flew back to New Jersey 3 days later. She rented a car and drove to her old neighborhood. Everything looked the same. The streets were the same. The houses were the same, only she was different. She pulled up to the house she'd lived in for 15 years and felt something break open in her chest. Jennifer Patel was in the front garden, planting winter pansies. She looked up as Patricia approached, and her face registered recognition and caution. "Can I help you?" Jennifer asked. "I'm Patricia Henderson. I sold you this house." Jennifer set down her gardening gloves. "Oh, okay. Well, I would say welcome back, but I suspect this isn't a social call." "It's not," Patricia said. "I need to explain what happened with the pool." They sat in Jennifer and Michael's kitchen, different from when it was Patricia's kitchen, already stamped with their taste and their life. Jennifer brought tea. Michael joined them, cautious but not hostile. Patricia told them everything. She told them about the boundary dispute with the neighbor. She told them about the trespassing. She told them about her decision to open the gate as an act of redemption. She told them about the contamination that resulted from 5 days of unsupervised use. She told them about the biohazard signs that she'd installed and left deliberately as a final statement to a neighborhood that had rejected her. She told them about the choice to sell the house with the signs still up, with the contamination still present, partly because she didn't think the contamination was serious, and partly because she wanted the signs to be a permanent record of what had happened. When she finished, Michael and Jennifer exchanged a glance. "That's quite a story," Jennifer said carefully. "The pool is actually fine now," Michael added. "We had it remediated. It's clean. The cost was about $3,000, which isn't nothing, but it's not catastrophic." "I'm sorry," Patricia said. "I should have disclosed all of this to Sylvia. I should have made sure you knew what you were buying." "Did Sylvia know?" Jennifer asked. "I don't think so. I don't think I was clear enough about what had happened." Jennifer stood up and walked to the window that overlooked the pool. The biohazard signs were gone. The water was clear again. It looked perfect. "You know what's weird?" Jennifer said. "When we bought this house, I was so excited about the pool, but Michael worried that a house with such an obvious feature felt like maybe we were buying someone's trophy instead of a home. And then we found the contamination and the biohazard signs, and instead of being angry, we were, I don't know, relieved." Patricia felt confused. "Because," Michael explained, "a perfect house felt unsafe. It felt like it was hiding something, but a house with problems we could fix, that felt real. That felt like it had a history and a story, and we could write the next part." Patricia felt tears sliding down her face without permission. "I'm selling the house," Patricia said. "If you'd like to recoup the remediation costs, I can." "No," Jennifer said. "No, you're not. You sold us the house. It's ours now. We're not going to come after you for the pool remediation cost. We're going to use the pool for pool parties and summer barbecues and all the things we bought this house for." "But the neighbor," Patricia said. "Corinne Mitchell, she's investigating whether I deliberately contaminated." "Let her investigate," Michael said. "There's a clear narrative here. You had a dispute with a neighbor, you made some poor decisions in response. A minor contamination resulted, it was fixed, and everyone moves on. There's nothing criminal about that. There's nothing fraudulent about that." "But I left the signs up deliberately," Patricia protested. "I didn't disclose the contamination to you before selling." "You also weren't required to," Jennifer said. "You told your realtor about the biohazard signs. We saw them. We chose to buy anyway. And actually, now that I think about it, those signs probably saved us from buying a pool that had serious problems without realizing it. So in a weird way, your spite probably helped us." Patricia didn't know what to say to that. "What I will tell you," Jennifer continued, "is that you might want to talk to your lawyer about Corinne's investigation. If she's suing anyone, it'll probably be the HOA, not you. Because she has a legitimate complaint that the HOA didn't take her safety concerns seriously. So you might actually benefit from the lawsuit against them." Patricia understood suddenly that what had felt like the culmination of her downfall might actually be the mechanism of her redemption. Corinne had been right about the pool being a safety concern. The signs Patricia had installed as an act of spite had been technically accurate. And now Corinne was seeking accountability from the right entity, the HOA, which had required the signs without addressing the underlying contamination issue. Patricia was suddenly, unexpectedly, on the correct side of this story. Not because she'd intended to be, but because the truth, finally, was simple enough that intention didn't matter. Corinne's investigation resulted in a settlement with the HOA for a sum reported to be $75,000, compensation for the negligence of not taking the biohazard signs seriously, and for allowing a contaminated pool to remain on a residential property for a week without remediation. Patricia was not named in any lawsuit. Patricia was not required to pay any damages. Patricia's sale of the house was deemed legitimate and non-fraudulent. And Corinne, having won the settlement, seemed finally to rest. She and Rachel decided instead to meet somewhere in the middle. Rachel took a 6-month consulting position with a firm in Philadelphia. Patricia rented a small apartment nearby. They spent time together in a way that didn't feel obligated or desperate, because neither of them was running away anymore. In February, they attended a retreat together. Not a therapy retreat, but a painting retreat, where neither of them had any particular talent, but both were willing to make fools of themselves for the sake of time together. Rachel was terrible at landscapes. Patricia discovered she had an unexpected gift for still life. They didn't talk much about the pool situation during that time, but it was always there, a quiet lesson underneath everything else. One evening, in the apartment in Philadelphia, Patricia was looking at an article about her old neighborhood on the local news website. The Riverside Estate community had made the news because the HOA was facing a lawsuit about governance practices. Corinne had apparently given several interviews about her experience and her concerns. "You ever regret leaving?" Rachel asked, looking over Patricia's shoulder at the article. "Every day and never," Patricia said, "which I realize doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense," Rachel said. "You regret leaving the life you'd built, but you don't regret leaving that particular version of yourself, the one who was so afraid of change that she built walls instead of boundaries." Patricia closed the laptop. "Do you think Corinne regrets how she handled it?" Rachel asked. "I don't know," Patricia said. "I think Corinne was dealing with her own fear, the fear of not being able to provide for her kids the way she wanted, the fear that I had something she didn't and that I was choosing not to share it. I don't think Corinne was bad. I think Corinne was scared, same as me." "And the new owners?" Rachel asked. "I think Jennifer and Michael were wise. I think they understood something I didn't, that a perfectly maintained property is actually more suspicious than one with obvious problems, because real life is messy. Real life has contaminated pools and spiteful biohazard signs, and the beauty is in choosing to remediate and move forward anyway." Rachel smiled and squeezed her mother's hand. In late March, Patricia returned to the neighborhood for the first time since the closing. She didn't contact anyone. She just drove past the house, past the pool, noting the changes Jennifer and Michael had made. The biohazard signs were long gone. There was furniture on the terrace. There were lights strung in the trees, remnants of some previous gathering. She drove past Corinne's house and saw children in the backyard. Probably Emma and her siblings, all of them growing, all of them beautiful and alive, and unaware that their summer coolness had cost so much. Patricia didn't feel anger anymore. She felt sadness, which seemed more appropriate. She drove to the cemetery where Marcus was buried and sat by his grave for an hour without speaking. "We would have hated this drama," she finally said aloud. "You would have thought it was absurd and you would have been right. And I would have defended myself and you would have let me because that was how we were together. You let me be right even when I was wrong." She placed her hand on the stone. "I'm trying to be different now. I'm trying to see when I'm wrong sooner. I'm trying to stop building walls. I'm trying to let people in." A light wind moved through the cemetery. Patricia sat a while longer, then stood up and walked back to her car. In May, Patricia received a letter from Corinne Mitchell. It was handwritten, which was somehow the most shocking thing about it. In a world of emails and texts, Corinne had taken the time to sit down and write a letter by hand. "Dear Patricia," it began, "I've been thinking about our situation for months. I've been thinking about what I did and what you did and what we both did together. I owe you an apology and I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say it anyway. I was frightened that summer. I was frightened that my kids didn't have access to the same things other kids had. I was frightened that I wasn't giving them enough, and I channeled that fear into anger at you, which was wrong. You had the right to say no. You had the right to secure your property. I should have respected that. Instead, I made you the villain of the neighborhood narrative. I did it deliberately. I did it to make myself feel less bad about my own inadequacy as a parent. And I realize now that I hurt you in the process, and I hurt the new owners of your house, and I ultimately hurt everyone. I won the settlement with the HOA because I was right about the pool being a safety concern. But I was wrong about the reason for the concern. I thought you were being malicious. I thought the biohazard signs were evidence of your cruelty. But you were actually trying to communicate a real danger. You were doing the right thing in a terrible way, which is still better than doing the wrong thing in a polite way. My children have a pool now. Michael helped me with a contractor and we fixed ours. It's small and it's not fancy, but it's ours and my kids think it's perfect. I hope you're doing well, wherever you are. Karen. Patricia read the letter 5 times. She wrote a response also by hand, which felt important. The idea that they might return to an older form of communication, something slower and more considered. Dear Karen, she wrote, thank you for your letter. I'm not sure I deserve an apology from you because I think I created most of the conditions that led to what happened. I was wrong to assume the worst of your motivations. I was wrong to respond to your fear with cruelty. And I was wrong to leave the biohazard signs up as a final statement of spite. But you were also wrong. You were wrong to orchestrate my social exile. You were wrong to make me feel like I was the villain for having a boundary. And you were wrong to continue pushing when I'd already said no. I think what happened to us is what happens to people when they're both frightened. We lashed out at each other because we didn't know what else to do, and we hurt each other more than we needed to. I'm glad your children have a pool now. I hope it brings them joy, and I'm glad you took the time to write to me. If you ever want to have coffee and talk about something other than the pool, I think I would like that, but I understand if you don't. Patricia and Karen never did have coffee. But they sent occasional emails over the years, nothing substantial, just small updates about their lives. Karen's kids growing up, going to college. Patricia's continued growth in her relationship with Rachel. Small human acknowledgments that they'd both been transformed by what happened, and that neither of them was the same person who'd fought over that pool. Patricia eventually moved back to the East Coast fully, this time to Philadelphia, where she worked part-time for a nonprofit that helped homeowners navigate property disputes. It was, she realized, the only career that could have interested her after everything that happened. She and Rachel grew close in a way they hadn't been since Rachel was young. They had brunched together regularly. They took trips. They fought sometimes, but they never stayed angry because they'd both learned what anger could do if you let it solidify into walls. It was 7 years later, on a warm June morning, when Patricia received a phone call from Jennifer Patel. Hi Patricia, it's Jennifer, from your old house. Patricia's heart jumped. Hi Jennifer, how are you? How's the house? The house is great. Actually, that's why I'm calling. We've decided to sell. We're moving to the city for Michael's job, and I thought you should know that the pool is perfect. It's become our favorite thing about the property. We've hosted hundreds of people over these 7 years. Patricia felt tears starting. And I wanted to thank you for leaving us such a beautiful thing, Jennifer continued. Even though it came with complications, even though the story behind it is complicated, it's still beautiful, and it brought so much joy. After they hung up, Patricia sat in her office and cried quietly, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of redemption that sometimes comes when you finally understand that your worst moment doesn't define you. The pool had been hers. The pool had been theirs. The pool had been the site of conflict and misunderstanding and fear. And in the end, the pool had been what it was always meant to be, a place where people gathered, where children played, where summer joy was shared. Patricia had been wrong about so much, but she'd eventually been right about letting go. Epilogue. 20 years later, Patricia was 78 years old, and she'd just finished writing her memoir. In it, she spent an entire chapter on the pool, on Karen, on the summer that changed her life. She titled the chapter, The Biohazard Signs. In it, she didn't make herself the hero or the victim. She made herself human, a woman dealing with grief and fear who'd responded to those emotions by building walls. A woman who'd eventually learned that walls are prisons you build for yourself, thinking you're building them to keep others out. She sent an early copy to Karen, who was now 75 years old and retired from her job as a pharmaceutical sales representative. Karen's children had grown up and moved away, just like Patricia's had. Karen was now a grandmother of 4. Karen read the chapter and called Patricia. You didn't make me into a villain, Karen said. You weren't one, Patricia said. Neither was I. We were just two frightened women trying to protect our own interests, and we hurt each other in the process. That's not villainy. That's just being human. I'm sorry, Karen said. I know we've made peace over the years, but I never really said it directly. I'm sorry. I'm sorry too, Patricia said. And then after all these years, they did something they'd never done. They talked. Really talked. For 3 hours, they talked about the pool, about their children, about the neighborhood, about loss and fear, and the ways we all try to protect ourselves. When they hung up, Patricia and Karen had something they'd never had before. Not forgiveness, because there wasn't really anything left to forgive, but understanding. The understanding that comes when two people finally see each other, not as enemies or obstacles, but as fellow travelers trying to make sense of a complicated life.